Thank you, Senator Tillis. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for being a great partner in this Human Rights Caucus. Thank you for being a good company on the journey. As you mentioned, I was blessed to have the partnership of a former senator from Illinois in starting this. But I got to say, when I first met Senator Tillis, I knew I was in for a treat. At the very first public event we were at after the election, he made a couple of definitive statements about things he cared about, things he was going to fight for, and my jaw dropped, and I went to him afterwards. I said, "Did you mean that?" He has the actual legislative record to back it up, work that he did in North Carolina in terms of reparations for women who were forcibly sterilized by the state during a terrible, tragic, and misguided period of eugenics, and supporting criminal justice reform. And Senator Tillis has been a wonderful chairman of the Intellectual Property Subcommittee. I know we're not here today to talk about intellectual property, but you may have heard that we have a little trouble getting along here in Washington. I don't know if this made the news or not, but you may have seen that Republicans and Democrats do not always agree. One of the things that has given me some hope and a reason to come back on occasion is the working relationship I enjoy with Senator Tillis. So thank you very much, Tom. And to Bill Bodie, who helped support Tom's work. I also want to thank, if I can, Anna Yelverton, who's in my office. Anyone who knows how Washington really works recognizes that that's who's doing the work. We just show up and give the remarks they write for us, and we get to look good, and people applaud, and those are the folks who've actually done the work. Let me focus, if I could, as well, to our panelists. We've got some remarkable folks who are going to speak here in just a few minutes, and I appreciate your research and your advocacy about the human rights abuses occurring in China, and Omer, for sharing your personal story of what's happened. That is, I think, particularly important as we take on human rights challenges. Senator Tillis and I are currently working on legislation that would strengthen this Human Rights Caucus, elevate its status to that of a Human Rights Commission, provide it with dedicated funding, and name it for late Senator John McCain of Arizona. It would name it the John McCain Human Rights Commission in the Senate to be a comparable counterbalance to the Human Rights Commission that is in the House and is named for a former congressman there. I do think, if he were still here, that Senator McCain would be leading the charge to provide accountability for the detention of a huge number of Uyghurs in Xinjiang region in China. In April, I had the opportunity to lead a CODEL to China, and my takeaway from that trip was that the Chinese government has their own model of governance and their own argument for the need for and the value of their mass surveillance system, and I frankly disagree with both. I discussed the situation in Xinjiang with Chinese officials. They described their actions there as legitimate undertaking of counterterrorism, and I frankly reject the idea that Muslims generally, and Uyghurs in particular, are inherently extremist or inherently prone to violence, and either needing or deserving of the type and style of supervision and engagement and frankly, what I view as violations of human rights that have occurred in China. I don't think governments can or should pick and choose arbitrarily when to respect universal values and human rights. Arbitrary detention and other violations of fundamental freedoms are frankly bad counterterrorism policy, and they end up breeding rather than defeating instability. The United States has our own shameful history of responding to instability and to attacks with fear. And with actions that we are not proud of. I'll say that, for example, relocating thousands of Japanese American citizens to internment camps during World War II is just one of many examples of where we misused the power of government to detain people and surveil people who were no threat to our homeland and to our security. And I think we need to do everything in our power to prevent abuses like that in our own country going forward, but also in countries where we are friends, partners, or allies to call them out as well. That's what it means to stand for human rights, is to be accountable for them in our own society and in other societies as well. So I was proud to support passage of Senator Rubio's Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act through the Foreign Relations Committee. I hope it gets deserved time on the Senate floor. It directs the executive branch to investigate and report on China's treatment of Uyghurs and the development of technology that facilitates mass internment and surveillance. I am particularly concerned about the export of that approach, mindset, and technology around the world. And I'm particularly interested in hearing from our panelists about how we could prevent U.S. source technology from being used to perpetuate or even accelerate abuses against the Uyghurs. As we work to shed light on the situation for possibly millions of Uyghurs who've been detained in Xinjiang, We also need to continue to call on the Chinese government to promote religious freedom, as Senator Tillis correctly recounted. We have both worked hard on religious freedom, religious liberty issues. So whether it's Tibetan Buddhists, Christians, Falun Gong practitioners, I think the Chinese government has a very troubled record in terms of religious freedoms. And it's my hope that we can hear from the panelists about how we could help promote respect for these freedoms. So for everybody who's taken the time to be here or to travel here, thank you. For our talented panel that will share with us important and challenging insights, thank you. And I'm now going to turn it over to Francisco. Thank you, Francisco, for moderating today, and thank you again to my friend and colleague, Senator Tillis.